Possible fallout. Some may think that living off the grid, if widely adopted, may take our modern and advanced society backward. And many may also think that living off the grid brings social fragmentation, individual selfishness, and division to our communities. Others may think that living off the grid is living totally isolated and indifferent of others, like the young, the poor, the elderly, the disabled, etc. Furthermore, there may be predictions that it would bring economic and social instability, the return of the law of the jungle, anarchy, and disorder. I hope I've shown in the many previous chapters that I strongly beg to differ, and, sadly, most of these just described are currently being brought about not by the few that live off the grid, but by our current monetary system. Yes, the one which I've spoken about amply here, and where most of us live under. Think about it. Greed, selfishness, rampant poverty, ignorance, and carelessness for others are all overarching staples of capitalism. Again, here, I hope I've thoroughly argued that living off the grid brings none of the above described, and in most cases brings about the complete opposite. An off-gridder in a grid-tight society, such as now, of course, will be the outcast, the odd one, and the recluse. That is true only because she or he is the abject minority, and in some cases, the only person living this lifestyle in any given area. And, let's face it, most of us tend to reject minorities, even when they are obviously right, just, or simply better. So, accepting that outcast, odd, or weird is not necessarily bad, harmful, or wrong, it is the only way to move past our biases and test the waters. We must also accept that those that are disruptive are not necessarily wrong, since disruption is just change, where change is immediately uncomfortable. This change, however inconvenient, we must admit, may be advantageous. I hope, as I have presented in this book, to have clearly shown that change is sorely needed. Our environment is screaming at the top of the hills for change. Change in our destructive, polluting, and wasteful habits. The world's majority, the poor, are begging for change. Change in our greedy and cruel social and economic paradigms. Humanity is crying out for change. Change to stop the rampant and unnecessary death and suffering due to our unsafe roads, inadequate health care, growing violence and wars, and our abuses and criminality. Our current fossil fuel energy system is unsustainable, and we have the necessary data pointing to this. This too is screaming for change. A growing few are becoming dangerously dependent on artificiality and excess, and are hoarding wealth, power, and the ability to destroy natural environments with great efficiency. And the many are increasingly becoming over-reliant on systems controlled by these powerful few. These and the many other reasons outlined in this book are why we need disruption and disruptors, outcasts, oddballs, and weirdos to think and live off the grid in a grid-tied society. Those people, I believe, are more aware that there is need for change, and they may be the ones to usher a better future. There may be a time where these people won't need to hide, blend in, or be conspicuous. Of course, not while there's still maliciousness and persecution. So while working on the necessary change, we must also demand our societies to embrace all of us, even those who live differently, recognizing that change is sorely needed. Further, I argue that if living off the grid became the norm and became a widespread lifestyle, it would hugely benefit our society and humanity, not just in how we would save the environment and the climate, but in how we may help better countless other areas of our society. Further, it would help individuals become more wholesome, powerful, and capable, help most people to save energy and money, better manage their time, resources, and finances, and quickly expand into many other useful areas in their lives. And I believe it would increase the safety, health, and happiness of most people. So let's do a brief thought experiment. Let's imagine that living off the grid quickly spread like wildfire across a small town. Let's imagine that in your region, suddenly, living off the grid is now the norm. However, in this thought experiment, before off-gridders disconnected from their old, wasteful, corrupt utilities and other services, they had secured reliable replacements for those goods and services. So, there was a period of learning, preparation and trials prior to going off the grid. So there is little chance for chaos in the transition to going off grid, as many may think. And long before the transition, people would be empowered with useful and practical knowledge on how to safely, efficiently, and independently harness and manage resources. Resources like water, food, telecommunications, energy, and finances. For this, education and training in water management, farming, telecommunications, energy, and economics would be absolutely necessary. These few areas alone would require years of rigorous training and practice, let alone the rest of the education required by a single person. As you may tell, I believe in the power of education, so it would be thorough, effective, and free of charge for all. Education is a large topic, perhaps to be treated elsewhere in more detail, but I also believe that today's education system is largely ineffective and wasteful. So by the time a person is an independent adult in off-grid town, she or he is a more powerful, prepared individual, ready to harness, produce, and use resources responsibly and effectively. So, in this imaginary off-grid society, there would be vast differences in the way we live and interact with each other. For those that think and behave differently, there would be no need to hide and remain indoors. If an area needs improvement and someone has an idea to improve it, they'd be encouraged to speak up. There would be no need to mask your resource-saving efforts to avoid the harassment and shame. Those efforts would be encouraged. With a more educated public, logical and reasonable thinking would dominate public discourse. And with reduced ignorance, compassion, tolerance, and forward thinking would increase significantly, thus improving the quality of life for most. There's going to be important differences in the neighborhoods across this off-grid town. First, no costly and dangerous electric power cables and infrastructure strewn about our streets, our roads, or in between cities. So safety would increase and waste and costly inefficiency would decrease. For energy production and maintenance, those power plants, substations, towers, and cables would be replaced by local solar energy production on each building's rooftop. As power companies disappear, there would be significantly less utility bills to worry about, so no tears for that. With no electric utility bills, people's kept income would be much higher. Eventually, there would be no bills for water service, electric service, internet service, or telecommunication services. Hooray! So, people's financial standing would improve, as would their quality of life, and the stress and worry about finances would be things of the past. Due to all the improvements in energy production and use, there would be very little, if any, air, water, and noise pollution, so breathe easy. And since fuel would quickly become a thing of the past, transportation would change significantly. Air transportation would be largely replaced by train travel. Cars would finally become less needed due to better designed cities, and all transport would be non-polluting and quieter. Perhaps electric mass transit would be the norm, or smart and connected electric vehicles, all on tracks for safety. These mentioned measures alone would improve pedestrian and driver safety on the roads significantly. This would finally put a stop to all of the death and carnage of our current roads. These benefits would also allow many animals and plants to return to the cities and thrive alongside people. Also, water sources would be cleaner, shared, and maintained, all free of charge. As most services would be free or funded by reasonable taxes as a public service, I envision all necessities to be free because people would know we all depend on these, and it would be considered criminal, as it should, for people to use others' needs as an opportunity to enrich themselves. Also, it would be considered criminal to deny water, food, and shelter to people that cannot and don't want to pay for them. So, in off-grid town, there would be no need to feed the greed of a few for the benefit of some and for the detriment of the many. I believe that the economic system would be so impacted by this new paradigm that greed and selfishness would be highly discouraged. So money may lose most of its appeal in such a society. Furthermore, I think there would be very little hoarding of resources, for example, water, food, land, and material property. For example, if a neighbor in off-grid town lacks a water filtering system and she is unable to obtain one, perhaps someone capable in those systems may somehow become aware of the need, and they may quickly donate and install one for her. Similarly, food sources would be shared and maintained free of charge or as a public service. Many in off-grid town may choose to grow their own foods locally, while others will go get food from available public local sources as needed. Make no mistake, this is not food rationing. This is smart and efficient food resource management for the benefit of all. This is not a central food distribution bank. Recall that in off-grid town, people were empowered to produce food and share their products with those that choose to specialize in other fields. And in off-grid town, residents have accepted that quality basic necessities should not be offered only to those with money, or that quality products and services should not be reserved for those with more money. There, it would be practiced that even the poorest among them are capable of great things and deserve access to quality resources and services: water, food, energy, healthcare, housing, transportation, telecommunications, learning, etc. In such a town, I envision poverty to be a rare and temporary affair. Additionally, in off-grid town, most every home may have at least one expert in one or more areas of water management, food production, energy production, and telecommunications. This is due to the education provided that empowers individuals, which in part teaches to avoid becoming overly dependent on any system and teaches highly technical specialties. And there would be the freedom and encouragement to be self-sufficient and efficient, independent while connected to others as best as possible. See, living off the grid is necessary today, mainly because the grid-tied world has turned corrupt, abusive, wasteful, violent, unhealthy, and polluting. But since those grid problems are mostly solved in off-grid town, then being off the grid is not necessary, because the grid is now mostly clean, healthy, efficient, non-abusive, etc. Get it? Respect for life and health would be paramount to all else in off-grid town, so the well-being of all would be a protected right with the fullest force of the law. In turn, violence and conflict would not be allowed nor tolerated from anyone, official or civilian. Violence would be completely outlawed, and no effort would be spared to correct anyone's reliance on violence. In this way, war and conflict would become illegal, and by extension, any tools used in war. In this future, violence would only be perpetrated by criminals. Importantly, most everyone would privately own their means to produce and use water, food, energy, and communications, all free of charge, contracts, or commitments. But there may also be networks of people that share those resources free of charge. So in off-grid town, there would be no abusively costly utility water, no greed-ridden food industry, no corrupted and monopolistic electric companies, and no manipulating and snooping telecommunications industry. Furthermore, basic things such as housing, healthcare, and transportation would be absolutely free of charge. Financial charges for people's needs would all be things of the past, and the funds and jobs from the obsolete industries would shift to the many other expanding industries in healthcare, education, exploration, technology, etc. And employees and resources would be shifted to other needs in government, institutions, and commerce. Also, since there would be a marked decrease in the bills that most people would pay, perhaps most households won't have financial responsibilities, so there would be less need to work for money. Instead, I believe work would be driven by other rewards, and personal energies and resources would be dedicated for people, activities, and things that workers deem important. In this way, the bondage to employers, the human labor trafficking, wage slavery, and labor exploitation would all be mostly eradicated. Let me stop here and remind you that I'm not trying to dream up a utopian or perfect society. These are just very conservative visions of what I believe to be likely outcomes of the widespread acceptance of living in a certain way, living with people, efficiency, sustainability, reason, and evidence as major driving forces for decision making. Many in off-grid town will choose to interconnect so as to make it simpler and more efficient to harness and use resources such as water, food, energy, and telecommunications. For example, There may be safe interconnections among many homes that produce energy from solar and create a grid of electric energy that is free of charge. This method allows the entire network to be little affected by problems with individual points of production. This same interconnection principle may apply to other services and goods. There, interconnection would not be the replication of what we now have. There would be decentralized networks. For example, for utility energy, we now have a grid of interconnected recipients of energy, of which the energy originates at a large central location. Interconnection in off-grid town means connecting producers and sharing production among a much smaller network where production is not controlled by a single individual or company. Here, there's a balance of power, which is important to prevent abuse. I believe off-grid town would still use the monetary system or something similar to it. However, it may evolve into electronic-only form and mostly used for large-scale commerce and industry, since perhaps most people's basic needs will be met money-free, like many of the paid services of today, healthcare, housing, education, etc. Again, services necessary to life and health would be provided without the exchange of funds. In contrast, today we barbarically consider those basic services as privileges, only to be gotten by those with plenty of money. I believe that in the future we would evolve out of such backward mentality. So, I strongly believe that the advantages are there to living off the grid now, and that the future is bright if you uphold and practice this lifestyle. Importantly, the off-grid future does not require fragmentation and division, isolation and reclusivity, nor does it require danger or illegal activity. Living sustainably and smartly is by definition advantageous, safe, and liberating. In that future, I believe living normally would replace the words living off the grid. But for now, living off the currently harmful grid is necessary and is a way for us to become free and able to unleash our productive, sharing, and helpful potential. And it would allow us to advance more sustainably and securely into the ever-changing future, on Earth and elsewhere. Thank you for listening or reading.